Welcome to the Public Technology Institute's Professional Development Series, a free monthly webinar series designed to connect local government IT professionals with the people, conversations, and ideas that matter most. PTI is the only national organization dedicated exclusively to supporting local government technology through consulting, education, and a peer-connected community. We help you lead smarter, grow faster, and stay ahead of what's next. In this month's episode, when the budget forecast is cloudy with a chance of cuts, we will explore different strategies to help IT executives to communicate effectively when it comes time for budget season. Let's dive in.
And welcome to today's webcast, Budget Forecast, Cloudy with a Chance of Budget Cuts. I'm Barry Condrey, Director of Technology Consulting for the Public Technology Institute, and I'm excited to serve as the host for today's webcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great discussion today. This webinar is brought to you by the Public Technology Institute, PTI. A bit of background on the Public Technology Institute before we begin. PTI was formed back in the 1970s to support and encourage the use of technology in government. Today, we're a division of Fusion Learning Partners, a nonprofit organization with a very similar mission formed in Minnesota in the 1970s. PTI has three divisions or three pillars, we like to call them. First is the education pillar. We do certificate and certification programs for government CIOs and leaders. We have a membership division that takes care of the collaboration and sharing of resources such as this webinar and our national conferences. And we have a technology consulting division. That's the division that I head up, where we help local governments build the foundation with engagements focused on strategic planning, cybersecurity assessments, policy work, and similar efforts. You can find out more about PTI and our national conference coming up in November at www.pti.org. We have a few housekeeping notes for you before we begin today. The PTI webinar series releases a new webinar on the fourth Tuesday of every month. Webinars can be found in the PTI Community Hub at community.pti.org, and I will drop that link in the chat. I will place a link. I'm going to place that link in the chat now. One week from today, PTI members will be invited to a tech talk to do a deeper dive on this topic. We're going to continue the conversation there, dive a little bit deeper into it. Go to the Community Hub, the link I just put into the chat, and visit the PTI event calendar to add the Tech Talk to your calendar and to access the Tech Talk meeting links. Our PTI Community Hub is a resource we are building out for you. You will find my GovIT2Go blog there, as well as these webinars and other resources. So be sure you check that out. Okay, so now on with the webinar. Joining me today to discuss this topic is Laura Fitzpatrick, Deputy City Manager with the City of Chesapeake, Virginia. Laura, welcome to the webinar. Please take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us a little about your background.
Thank you, Barry, and hello to everyone out there in the PTI community who will be watching this class. I currently serve as Deputy City Manager for the City of Chesapeake, Virginia. In this role, I provide leadership and oversight to the Departments of Finance, Budget, Procurement, and IT. Chesapeake is a community of 256,000 residents. In internal services here in our organization, we support a workforce of 5,000 people, about 4,000 full-time equivalents. I have worked in city management for 25 years now for 5 different cities in 3 different states. I have served on the budget review committee in all 5 of those cities. So I've been doing this for a long time now.
Okay, you're a survivor. You've been in the budget world for 25 years in local government. I'm sure you've seen a lot, including like the .com bust and the the turmoil that we went through with the upending of the real estate market. So very good. Hey, also, Laura, congratulations on your certified government CIO certification that you just earned from the Public Technology Institute in our CGCIO certification program. You graduated. You're in the class that just graduated with that.
Yes.
And congratulations on that. I'm an alumni of that program as well. And I just want to point out that we're taking applications for the fall 2026, 2027 cohort now. You can go to our website, pti.org, and get more information about that excellent professional development opportunity. So, okay, let's go on and get started. Now, I was the CIO for Chesterfield County for many years, and they're a triple A, Chesterfield County, Virginia. They're a triple A rated local government, something they're very proud of, and something that saves them a lot of money when it comes time to borrow money in the bond market. They were very focused on fiscal stewardship. And I was very fortunate all along the time to have a talented budget professionals like Laura here to help with that budget process. I've worked with a lot of localities over the years, and I know many of the struggle with getting adequate resources to accomplish technology goals and to enable local government to meet their high-level goals. Many CIOs don't understand how the budgets are constructed and why the whys and the hows of how budget decisions are made, and they struggle to effectively negotiate for technology resource needs. So with this webinar, we're going to get sort of a peek behind the curtain and unpack this a little bit for how all this is accomplished. So Laura, let's start with your organization. Help us understand the scope of your area of the city government. What departments do you have underneath you, and what does the city look like?
Yeah, so similar to Chesterfield County, the City of Chesapeake has a long tradition of fiscal stewardship and sound financial practices and policies. We are also in the triple A club for our credit rating, just like Chesterfield County. And we also are a Triple Crown winner through the Government Finance Officers Association, which means we have a tradition of excellence awards for our budget document, our annual financial reports, and our popular annual financial report. And all of those documents can be found on the city's website. We have a thorough budget process that begins in August and concludes when the budget director and city manager present the city manager's recommended budget to the city council in March. This year, that's happening March 24th. Leading up to the presentation of the recommended budget, department directors and their management teams make their budget pitch to the budget review committee. And that happens for the capital budget in November and December, those hearings, those presentations, and then for the operating budget, those presentations are in January and February.
One thing I was always encouraged to do when I was at Chesterfield was start early. And the joke was, as soon as the budget is approved by the board or by the council, that's when you really start the next year's budget. As soon as the first budget is approved, we didn't even get to the next fiscal year before we started working on our budget. So, when you consider CIOs navigating this budget process, this annual process that we all have to go through, what is one thing they should really focus on more? What do you see CIOs? What do you think CIOs should focus on through this process?
I believe strongly that CIOs and all department directors should view the budget process as a communication exercise. And Barry, you just mentioned concluding the process and then preparing for the next process. I would go a step further. I tell my team that we should be building a shared understanding of our work in internal services in IT 365 days a year. I had someone say to me once, we want to have excellent service and build shared understanding of our services and our work and build relationships with our customers and decision makers all year long so that we can earn the benefit of the doubt. So that when there's an outage, our customers and stakeholders will have confidence in the IT team that they're working on the outage, that they'll get us through the outage. When the CIO comes to the budget review committee on that one day a year and is requesting resources, he or she has already earned the benefit of the doubt and built the reputation of IT to make the audience of decision makers very amenable and open to the funding requests.
So I think you remember from the CGCIO program, there's an entire class that's on nothing but communications, right?
Yes.
And the thing we always used to tell people is you have to get out of your office and go knock on doors. So, if the first time you're showing up in front of a department is when you're trying to explain an outage to them, that's a difficult situation to be in. So I really appreciate what you said about making it a year-long exercise so that
Yes.
they understand the value of the services that you deliver, that you don't have to, that's not something you impress upon them during the budget process. That's something that's part and parcel to being the technology leader in the organization. So I think, so, if, I think if CIOs understood a little bit more about the decision-making process of a budget review committee, and every organization's got a budget review committee. They might not call it the budget review committee. They're going to call it something. I think it would fill in a lot of gaps for the CIOs if they understood about that decision-making process. Some organizations don't really share that you could be a CIO in an organization and it could very much be a back room, a smoke-filled back room kind of thing for the budget. And then some are incredibly transparent about the way these things happen. Can you share a little bit with us about how budget committees go about making these decisions?
Yes. And here at the City of Chesapeake, we're very transparent about our decision-making process and about the membership of the committee. The budget director leads a budget kickoff in the fall, and the budget director and I also, on a separate day, provide how to make your budget pitch training. And we talk about who comprises the membership of the budget review committee. And this is very important for the CIO, for all the directors to take into consideration as they're preparing their budget pitch. In Chesapeake, the makeup of the budget review committee, the committee that makes decisions, makes funding recommendations to the city manager, are the 4 deputy city managers. I am one of 4 deputy city managers, the city manager, the budget director, the human resources director, the finance director, and the assistant to the city manager over strategic planning and process improvement. One thing of note about this group that all directors should be cognizant of is none of these individuals typically are experts in IT. They're experts in other areas or they're generalists. And that is important because as you're preparing your budget pitch and preparing to communicate your resource needs and the impacts of additional resources or the impacts of decreases in resources, it's very important to communicate that clearly to this team. And I always tell our team that when you're preparing a communication or a presentation or explaining your work, your services, really put yourselves in the shoes of the audience. Who is your audience? What do they need to know? What background do they need to have to understand what you are trying to convey with your budget pitch?
I love what you said about transparency. I've always felt like transparency is a great way to build trust. And, trust is really, really important in the budget cycle internally. You've got to really be able to trust the process. People say, well, just trust the process. Well, it's helpful when you're transparent with the process, right? That you can then trust it. But you talk about training, you actually provide training for department directors. The training I'm used to is, okay, here's the spreadsheet or the SharePoint form. Here's how you fill it out, right? But I think your training probably goes a little bit beyond that. Are we going to talk about that at some point in the? I think that you are going to talk about that. Excellent. I think that's important. I also wanted to ask, is the same committee do operating budgets as well as capital budgets? Is it the same committee?
That's a great question. The committee is similar for capital budgets. I believe the human resources director is only on the operating budget, but other
Okay.
than that, only on the committee for the operating budget. But other than that, the committees are the same.
Okay. Very, very good. And you have to speak the language of the business user, right? So that's
Yes.
something else we talk about in CGCIO program is you can't go in there with acronyms. You can't go in there just talking about it from your perspective. You really have to speak in the language and the vernacular of the business, put it in their terms that they can understand. And so that's something I think CIOs struggle with. Frankly,
Yes.
I know I did. So
Yes, and that's not a dynamic unique to the CIO. A lot of directors struggle with that. And that is what we can help with in the city manager's office. When I was in graduate school at University of Kansas over 25 years ago, Professor John Nalbandian in his infrastructure class would talk about working in the city manager's office and working as a translator of the work of departments. And who are we translating it for? Well, we're translating it for the city council, for the community, for whoever needs to understand the services and the policies. And if you really internalize this role of city government, local government leader as translator, it makes you think about communication differently.
I think everybody can relate to the role of and the importance of translator and the difficulties that can be had when things aren't translated or you can't translate. If you've ever, had to work with someone where English is not the first language and you've had to be very intentional about your communications. It's almost like that when you're talking to someone who's not a technologist, right? Technology is
Yes.
not their first language, right?
Yes.
So that's great. So and because they're not experts in IT. You really have very few experts in IT in the organization. So you've mentioned communication a few times in our conversation so far. It seems to be one of your themes that you come back to. Can you please share with us your journey around communication, particularly with IT and the budget process?
Yes. I have, like I said, been working in city management since 2000 to 2001. And that involves a lot of work with various departments of a local government and work with communicating their services, their concepts, their policies to a variety of audiences. My work with communication and interest in communication really ramped up in around 2012, 2013. I was assistant city manager in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, a suburb of Albuquerque. And part of my role as assistant city manager was to proofread the city council agenda memos before they went to the city manager. And what an agenda memo is, for those that don't know, is that's the communication from the staff, the communication from the directors to the governing body, to the city council through the city manager, making recommendations to city council on policy issues, on budget issues, on service delivery issues. It's very important that those communications are easy to understand for the target audience, the city council, but those are also public documents and they are reviewed by the media and the citizens. So it's important that all of those stakeholders can understand. So I was in the trenches of the translator role early in my career and have continued with that since I came to Virginia for the second time in 2014. I have been working very intensely with the internal services of local government. And I have given a lot of thought to the communication stakes in IT, in internal services. And I believe the stakes for communication and the need for effective communication skills are even higher in internal services than in external services. And why is that? Well, internal services, we don't have the benefit, like particularly in IT, of the obvious visible cues of our work. In law enforcement, you have police officers and police cruisers and the police headquarters building. In the fire service, you have fire trucks and fire engines and firefighters and images of, public servants running into burning buildings. The list goes on for public libraries, parks and recreation, public works. There's all these visible cues, and all of those things can be visual aids, photographs in a presentation about those services in a budget pitch. We have to work much harder in IT and in internal services to have visual cues, to create visual cues that explain our services. So I've given a lot of thought to that and invested a lot of energy with our team here at Chesapeake on communicating our internal services in a way that will connect with the audience about our work and the impacts of our work.
I was always really jealous of the public works director when it would come time for budget time because, that person controlled the water supply in the county, right? So every time somebody turned the tap on, they got an example, as you were saying, of the external service, right? Where, the IT people were always trying to convince people that, what we did was really vital, really important, but it's tough to understand, tough to see. So, being that translator and especially the experience with writing that you talked about, writing agenda memos, those can be really difficult for new department directors to come up with, for sure. But you mentioned something earlier about the class that you teach for directors about how to make your budget pitch. I think that's something that the audience would probably really get a lot out of. If you can share some tips and tricks from that would be wonderful.
Yes, definitely. So in our class, we talk about the audience. I mentioned those earlier in this discussion. When considering the audience, so in the case of the budget, it's the budget review committee. As you're prepping what information to share, consider what that audience might ask. Another thing that's important, the director typically, when they're making their budget pitch, it's to an audience of city manager and other senior staff. That typically comprises the budget committee. Although in some local governments, directors are making a budget presentation, a budget pitch directly to the city council. There's no one way to do it. It varies from local government to local government. So consider who your audience is, what they need to know, and really ask yourself, does my narrative connect to the audience, or is it going to alienate the audience? We've all had the experience of being on the receiving end of a conversation or a presentation or an explanation that's not clear or is confusing. And why might it be not clear or confusing? Too much information is being provided, too little information is being provided, no context is provided, too many jargon terms are being used, too many technical terms are being used, too many acronyms are being used. We all know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that. It's very alienating, disconnecting, and we want to communicate in a way when we're making our budget pitch to connect to the audience. So avoid those things that I just mentioned that cause that feeling of disconnection, of alienation. When you're making your budget pitch, you are asking for a new resource, new funds, or enhanced funding. And is the justification that you're making for this resource, is it painting a clear picture? And what does a clear picture in a budget pitch look like? Are the impacts of getting this funding, are you stating them clearly? What will the impact be on the internal customer? What will the impact be on the external customer? One thing that we've been experimenting with on my team here with internal services that I think can be very impactful is investment per employee, investment per department. So the IT team might be asking for $250,000 for application training tool or an AI training program, or a certain amount of funding for a new position to support our financial system. If you take that expense, that investment, and you divide it among all of the financial system users or all of the departments of the city, the cost per customer ends up being very small. And talking about the funding request as an investment per department, investment per customer, is an elevated way to talk about our work in IT in internal services. And I could go on and on.
And when you talk about internal services, a lot of the things that the technology leaders are asking for, they benefit the entire workforce. It's by nature, in a lot of
Yes.
organizations, it's by nature, it's an enterprise view. And so I like what you said, because if you divide the cost by, in your case, 5,000 employees, that can really put the cost per employee, that can really frame that cost in a different light. So, but I think you said, think about the questions you're going to get asked. And I was always encouraged to practice my budget pitch with someone outside of my department. Like, go find another department director who doesn't mind spending 20, 30 minutes with you, and just pitch it to them, and
Yes.
see what they say. But practice, 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 right?
Yes.
So,
I always encourage the members of my team to use a test audience, and that can be a really good way to prep and to figure out where you need to explain more.
right. I think a lot of CIOs these days are the I was in a webinar, I hosted a webinar the other day, and I asked the audience of CIOs to put into the chat their budget outlook for the next fiscal year, the one that they're planning now. And I got everywhere from 5% up to 5% down. It came in with about 15 of the CIOs. The average was 1.3% up, which, if, as a CIO, I look at that and say, well, that's a cut, because costs are going to escalate more than 1.3%. So, I mean, what do you say to CIOs that say to you, we're just trying to maintain, right? Like, we're not asking for a lot of new money to do new things. We're just trying to keep, we know times are tight. We're just trying to cover our maintenance increases and so forth without losing any capabilities. What would you say to CIOs that approached you like that?
I would call them to action to, in their budget pitch, be effective at telling the story, painting the picture of all of the, or maybe the major service agreements in the IT budget. If there's an agreement with Microsoft for all the user licenses, that's probably a good one to call out.
Right.
And don't itemize every single one with tiny font on a PowerPoint slide, but calling out some of the major ones and using that technique of, investment in this tool represents an investment of X dollars per department, X dollars per employee, and painting the picture that way. It's one of the things that we tell directors and their teams in the budget pitch training is be careful, do not use fear or make threats in your budget presentation. This is very ineffective and can backfire. And it can be easy to do that because of how essential IT services are. The tendency is there to maybe want to do that, but there are more productive and elevated ways to communicate needs than making threats and using fear.
I think it's easy actually for CIOs to use fear, because, as you said, so many of the things that we deal with are essential, and there are so many threats out there. I mean, cybersecurity is one of these areas where the temptation is great to use fear. If we don't do this, we're going to get ransomed, right? If we don't
Yeah.
do this, then this is going to happen. And but you might be able to get away with that once or twice, but everything can't be an emergency and everything can't be fear-based, right? When you approach, uh,
Correct. And I think the chief of police or the fire chief would have much more likelihood of being able to get away with using fear than the CIO, though I don't recommend that any senior official in local government use fear. We're talking about communication and the budget. There are alternatives to using fear where you can convey the message. And we've talked on my team about indicating to the decision makers, this issue, this area of my department is what keeps me up at night. That's a softer, more delicate way than being threatening or using fear. Because as the CIO, as the director, your employer is paying you to be thinking about things. So sharing, this keeps me up at night, this is one of my concerns, would probably be a more effective way in making your pitch.
yeah, because every department director and everybody in the room has something that keeps them up at night.
Yep.
So they can all relate to some degree with that phraseology. So, and you also talked about referring to everything that you want to do for the workforce as an investment in the workforce. Say a little bit more about, I mean, I've always felt like when you talk about investments, you're really speaking the language of budget, right?
Mhm.
Like you say investment, that budget minds go immediately to what am I going to get for that investment? What's my
Mhm.
return on that investment? What's the security of that investment, right? Because they're thinking about it from a financial management perspective, not a CIO wants to buy 100,000 widgets, perspective. Say a little bit more about
Right.
the investment. I think that's a powerful concept.
When you're using the word investment, Barry, you're absolutely right. That's more the language of a budget office or a city manager's office. You are investing is a strategic activity. So it's a good word. And the other, you just mentioned, Barry, return on investment. So it's really, really important in a budget pitch that whoever is making that pitch is very clear on the impacts and we're impact on the customer, the internal customer, impact on the IT infrastructure, the impact of these funding enhancements, or if funding cuts, funding decreases are being discussed. It's important to explain those impacts in a very clear way. Another language item, and this is a word that we use a lot in Chesapeake, is outcomes. And outcomes are similar to impacts, but you want to make sure you're talking about outcomes in plain language that people can relate to. In our work in local government, when working with the team to prepare information, particularly for elected officials, but this can apply to the budget review committee as well. It's important we're succinct, but we provide enough information to build that shared understanding. I think of if a member of the city council was approached by a citizen in the grocery store. We currently have a project in Chesapeake, a huge project, a $30 million project to move off the mainframe to a modern system. And this is happening behind the scenes. It's been going on for a few years now. It will eventually, actually this year, impact the citizens because they are going to have more robust and easier online payment features and a bunch of other features. Well, if a citizen was running into a council person in the grocery store and wanted an update on this project or wanted to know what this project did, what are the three talking points we would want the council person to
Right.
have to understand this project and explain to the citizen the impacts? That is how we have to think as senior leaders when we are explaining the impacts of our services and projects.
It's a communication skill. Just
Yep.
like you were, this is all coming back to communications, as you said, very early in the webinar, right?
Yes. I should have mentioned at the beginning, my view of the world of work and of our work in local government, it's about results and relationships. We are not being effective if we're not coming to work and getting the results
Right.
that the community expects, that the city manager expects, that are outlined in our job description. If we're not leading our teams to get those results, we do not get optimal results without good relationships with our internal and external customers, relationships with our bosses, bosses, with the community, with the citizens. And the critical tool for results and relationships is communication.
I think I've observed over the last 20 years in government IT, a real change in the role of the CIO. You know, trans used to be it was just like the guy with the white lab coat on, pulling the levers and so forth behind the curtains or whatever. Now it's really the role is to be a relationship builder, is to be out there talking to the business, to be out there being strategic, communicating effectively in the terms of the people that he or she is speaking with, all those things that you're so eloquently putting out there. Um, so I really appreciate your perspective on that. So communications, relationships, uh, that's where you will find your results. So, okay, so we're going to have to start wrapping it up here. This has really been a great discussion, but in the interest of time, I want to ask you, Laura, for, one or two last words of advice for our audience to take with them as they go off into their technology warrior role in their local governments. What's one or two final things you want to leave our audience with?
Invest time in prepping communications up front with the budget process. I've observed that directors are so busy putting the budget together and they're focused on the numbers. Sometimes preparing the budget pitch gets done at the last minute, and that doesn't leave time, as Barry was saying, for using a test audience. The earlier you can prepare, the better. One thing I didn't mention as much when we're talking about the audience, really provide facts and quantify information where you can to justify funding request or defend proposed budget decreases. That is critical. And one note, I'm an introvert and not particularly a razzle dazzle salesperson, and you don't have to be razzle dazzle to make an effective budget pitch. Figure out what the audience needs, and maybe there are people on your team that you can draft as well to help make a budget pitch. And don't view it as much as a sales pitch, but view it as building a shared understanding, connecting with your audience, and this will be easier to do, much easier to do, if on the other 364 days of the year, you have been an effective communicator and ambassador for IT, and you have good results to stand on when you are making this pitch.
So, I think, and I think you're absolutely right. It's great advice. If you can start it, if you can make it an annual exercise, if you're coming at this during the budget process, trying to educate people about what you do and why you do it and what the important things are, and it's going to be a lot harder than if you do it year round. And there's trust there when you've done it year round. But I think some CIOs these days they're not so much it's not so much a budget pitch for this is what I want in my budget, but they're having to defend against being an area for cuts. Because sometimes when administrations don't understand what IT does, it could just look like one huge cost center. And IT is expensive these days, right? So what do you say to IT directors that are in the position of they're defending more than asking for additional? Is anything different about their budget pitch?
The principles are the same. You want
Okay.
to be very clear on the impacts of decreases, of cuts. What is the impact on the departments? What is the impact on the internal customers, on the external customers? And be very clear about it. There's probably going to be more emotion and frustration on the part of the IT team delivering this message to defend the cuts. That is a red flag to not use fear, to not get cranky, to not whine. You're not going to win any points with the budget review committee by having that affect. And just be very matter of fact and clear about the impacts of the cuts, of the proposed cuts.
All right, that's great. And I would always tell people to try to put it in their business terms. Well, what does it mean to the worker? What does it mean to the customer? What does it mean to the resident? The effect of that cut. And,
exactly.
And as you said, you're not trying to scare people. Or scaring people doesn't really work.
No.
Unless it's something incredibly urgent, like the need for ransom, or there's something that got missed and something's going to get turned off if some payment's not made. I mean, it's got to be something pretty obvious for that kind of fearing to work. And I love what you said about take the emotion out of it, right? Don't work for shared understanding. Don't try to scare them. Don't take it personally.
Yeah.
And don't try to take the emotion out of it and with a shared understanding. I think that's just fabulous advice. So, okay, listen, Laura, I really want to thank you. I could talk local government all day long, but in the interest of time, I'm afraid we do have to wrap it up here. This has been great information. And, for the audience, if you've enjoyed this webinar and you want to hear more, we have a tech talk scheduled for PTI members March 31st at noon Eastern Daylight Time, 1 week after this webinar. We're going to continue the conversation there, maybe get into a little bit more of the sausage making, and you can bring your horror stories to that, and we can talk about them. Okay, we'll have an hour. It's like Las Vegas. Whatever's said there stays there, and it's like a safe space for people. So, Laura, thank you so much for being with us today. Great job. And I would also like to thank the Public Technology Institute for making it possible to have this important webcast discussion today. Check out www.pti.org for more information, particularly about our big conference coming up in November. It'll be the 45th anniversary of the largest local government technology conference in America. We have educational opportunities and assistance that we can provide with consulting services. You can find more about that at our website, pti.org. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and so long, everybody.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to tune in to next month's webinar, Inside CIO Leadership for Cities and Counties, Emerging Trends, Practices, and the Power of Publishing Your Work, which will be released on Tuesday, April 28th. To check out all of PTI's learning opportunities and resources, visit us at pti.org.